G'day, I'm Mark Hoth and welcome to Swift Almanac. So we're installed, our database is built, and now we are looking to read and write to our database using Swift. First, we will look at the low-level database calls using the NSManagedObject class, and then we will convert our database into a class through subclassing the NSManagedObject class. You may recall that in our login series we used the low-level database calls, and we'll be referring to those, so you might want to download login 7 as well, and we will be continuing with the project that we were using in the last two videos, which is Final UI Collection View. Anyway, let's get started. Okay, so before we go ahead, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add a unique identifier to each of these two tables. So I'm going to go back into line mode because it's not buggy. So I'm going to have a person ID, which I'm going to set to be a UUID, and I'm going to have an address, and I'm going to have an address ID, which is also going to be a UUID. So the reason I'm using a UUID is because it's guaranteed to be unique. So every time I create an address or a person, I'm going to allocate it a UUID, and that way it would always be a unique identifier. There's other ways you can do it. You can have incremental counters, but core data doesn't have a default incremental counter, which means you need to save the current counter and increment it or do a max function or something like that. So this is just an easy way of doing it. So if we go to our login 7 project and have a look at that, we've copied across our persistent container and our save context, and if we have a look at user data, we would have had this the load users function and the save users function. So I'm just going to copy and paste those and bring those over here. I'm going to put them in the view controller area and just paste those in for the time being. Now, this was how we were loading and getting our users. I'll just delete some of the code that we don't need. Oh, we haven't included core data. I'll get rid of a few more. In fact, got rid of all of them. Okay, so that's good. So if you recall, under the old sort of the low level sort of situation, we have this NSManagedObject. We're not really sure what it contains, and we're doing this value for key to get the information. We need to know exactly what the field names are, and when we're saving it, we need to do this set value, and we've got a key. We need to know that this key matches the field names precisely, and if it doesn't, there's no error checking. If I put username 2 and compile that, it's still going to compile, and we're just going to get a runtime error. So this isn't particularly good, and so what Apple has done in their infinite wisdom, I wonder what that error is for. Oh, there's no such thing as chord data. Let's look at core data. Okay. So what Apple has done in their infinite wisdom, if you click on this final.xc data model D file, or whatever your equivalent file is called, you go to editor, you can go create NSManagedObject subclass and click final and select both of them, and you can save it wherever you want. And it's going to create these 4 files. The first file is just this class definition. It creates a class person, which is the name of the data file, and it's subclassing the managed object class, and then it creates another file which is an extension of this person class from the first file, and it creates this helper function fetch request, which is an NS fetch request of a person specifically. And if we look back at our previous fetch request, the NS fetch request was a generic here. It's NS fetch request result, and we'll get back to that shortly. And then it creates these properties, these 5 properties called name, age, gender, person ID, and address. And all of those, well, the string is optional, the UUID is optional, and this address is actually a pointer to an address in this address type. And in address, we're going to have all of our street, suburb, postcode, state, our address type, our address ID, and it's going to be pointing back to a person record. So what has happened by creating these 4 files, or just understanding what these 4 files look like, is we've removed the need for us to be calling in our load and save functions this value for key where we're not quite sure what it is, or set value for key and get typos here. Now we can just use dot notation because we've created classes, and we all know that a class with its properties is just simply person.name or person.age. It's all what we're used to in every other class in Swift, which makes it really, really nifty, because it means that Swift and the IDE and compiler is going to be type checking all of these properties now, so we can't get a runtime error. So there are quick ways of getting rid of these files, or creating these files. I'm going to move those ones to the trash. Now the compiler is not very happy with that, but that's okay. Now if we go into our database file and we click on the file, over here you see we've got code gen, and we've got this manual, which is when we do what we did with login, when we're using all this NS managed, where is it? Where we're doing all this, you know, set value for key and NS entity descriptions, inserting objects, etc., etc. And then we have a class definition, which is the default, and the class definition will automatically create for us those files that I just showed you how to manually create. And so it will create one file, which is the class definition, which will be empty, and it will create another file, which will be the extension, which will contain the fetch request, and it will contain the property names as @NSManaged with that thing at the front of the property definition, and then a var, and then the name. So when we've chosen by default code gen, what's going on is Xcode is placing those files in derived data. So we don't see them as part of our IDE, but they're there and they're compiled as part of our compiled data. Now, there's a third category, which is this category extension, and that's the one that we're going to use. Now, in category extension, what we need to do is we need to create manually each of those files. So we create a CocoaTouch file, which we will call person of type NSManagedObject, language Swift, and we'll put it in our model folder, and we've got person, and the thing that it doesn't do is it doesn't import core data, which is a bit silly. You'll note that this file is exactly the same as the one that is created by the editor. Now, it's not coming up because I haven't selected final, but when you select final and you go create NSManagedObject subclass, it creates this file, but when it creates it, it actually adds import core data. They still haven't fixed that bug in 9.1 beta. And then the next thing we need to do is we need to go to address, and we'll also do the same category extension, and we'll create a new file here. It's a CocoaTouch class. It's a subclass of NSManagedObject, and we're calling it address. Make sure it's in Swift. Same story, we add that, and now we've got these two files. Now, because we've selected in our data model that this is going to be category extension, then we create the class and the extension files are in derived data. So that fetch request that's specific for this class and all the properties of this class, they're in derived data and they're there. If you're not quite sure what they are, then you can create them. Like I showed you how, editor, create NSManagedObjects. And in fact, if you want to have both of those files, which you probably don't, but if you did, then all you need to do is select manual none, and you can create them both and add them in here, and then you'll always be able to see them. Now, the reason that you don't want to add them both is that Xcode is pretty smart, and when you change these types or change the names, etc., it will rebuild these extension files, that is the file with all the properties and the fetch request, in derived data on your behalf, and you can just go away and just type. And now you're going to be asking yourself, well, why do I want an empty class here? What am I going to do with these? And the simple answer is, if we go to NSManagedObject, there are functions in here which will get called and that you might want to override or install values of. Now, the one they use in the documentation is this prepare for deletion. And what they say here is where you might want to create or get some sort of notification on prepare for deletion. So in person, if we were going to delete this object, say we're keeping, and this is the example they use in the Apple documentation, is if you were keeping a count of how many people, so say you had 500 people, but you're about to delete one, then you're going to have 499. So in your preparing for deletion, you want to get a message saying, well, we're going to delete a record, so there's not going to be 500, so you want to set the counter to be like 499, so it would just be count minus equal 1. But that's, yes, we probably need to override just to fulfill the requirement. So that's why you would create this class and keep a record of it, because this is where you're going to keep all these overridden functions which are going to help you to manipulate parts of the database. Now, if you aren't overriding anything, all you're doing is using the dot notation to add or change the parameter values, then you don't need these two files. But it's nice to have them so that people can see that they're part of your data structure. And I think it's a bit of an all or nothing thing. You either have all of the files here or you don't. So don't have one that's working in manual and another one that's working in CodeGen, and another one, if you have 3 files, another one that's working in category extension. Because that will just confuse everyone in your team and you won't know what's going on. So that's basically how to set up a class. And if we just have a look here in the load user section, I'll show you how we would access the results. Okay, so look, we did these first 2 lines. Well, we don't need these, but as an example. And to create a record, all we need to do is go let our person equals the person class, and then there's this context parameter that we pass, and voila, we've created a person, and then we can just simply go person.age equals 17. Actually, we can't do that because it's below 18, but let's say it's 21. And then we can just go person dot gender equals true, and person dot, now we had a person ID, and it's been a while, but let's see if that creates a UUID for us. And name, person dot name is equal to Simon Says. And so that allows us to just use the dot notation in order to fill in the property values. And we can do the same with an address. Again, we need to pass the context. And we haven't filled in where we used, why is that? Aha, no, context. Now we haven't filled in the information in there, but we can simply set person.address equal to address, and then we've created the relationship, and then later we can go and fill in this this information. So that's how we set that's how we create a new record, and that's how we set the values of the properties for the new record. And so then what we need to do is we need to be able to save that record, and we need to be able to load those records back in. Right, trapped again by the problems of core data and the compiler. So let's build this again. And let's get rid of the code which, and why don't we get rid of these two? Well, we won't get rid of them, but we'll just comment them out. Okay, so so here we've shown you how to create a new record, and how to link up the relationship between a person and an address. And now what we want to do is we want to do a request of the records using the fetch request, and we want to save the records. So let's look at how we can do that. So what we want to do is go let request equals person dot fetch request, and so we'll get rid of this old one here. So we need to get the people. Now the thing is, look at this. We've got ambiguous use of fetch request. Now the reason for this is because NSManagedObject has a fetch request method, and person, which is our subclass of NSManagedObject, has this fetch request as well. And so it's ambiguous because the compiler doesn't know whether we're calling the person one or the NSManagedObject one. So what we need to do here is what I tell everyone to always do, is we need to define our variable before we assign a value to it, and we want to define ours as the type person, so that the compiler knows that this request is going to be the person.fetchRequest and not the super NSManagedObject.fetchRequest. So that is going to bring us back the people that we're looking for. However, the fetch request can do a couple of other things. It can it can sort things into order, and it can also obtain records that are like of a certain type. So we'd say, you know, age equals 25, or age less than 40, etc. But for the time being, we're just going to get all of the records. Okay, so we've got our fetch request. How do we get the results, right? This is like this is what we want to receive, which is going to be everything and unsorted, but it's going to come back as an array. So we can do this do catch try, or we could just simply say let results equal try question mark context dot fetch request. So the try question mark is saying run it. If it don't work, set this to nil, and then essentially we're going to get back an array of our objects, and you got this force cast from person to NSManagedObject always succeeds. So instead of having to go if let and doing all of this, we can just say for result in results, and we can just say let username equals result dot name, let age equals result dot age, let gender equals result dot gender. We won't use username, that's just let ID equal result dot I'm going to call it player ID, person ID. Person ID. This is going to allow us then to place all that information into our collection view controller, or do whatever it is we want with it. And we might want to say if result equals nil, print no records, or error, return. And so that allows us to access all the members, and we don't have all this value for key type stuff where we could have typos here and all the rest of us causing difficulties. And if we're looking at saving, so it's really straightforward. If you want to create or to save a record, we've got this try context.save. We've got our context. We just need the record, and we do that just like we did up here. So we'll just copy that and paste it down here. So we've created a person, we've added property values, and we've got our context. And once we've entered all of the information in, we just go try context.save, and again, if you don't care about the error handling, you can just put a question mark in there and it will save away. So look, that's the basics of using let's get rid of some of the errors. Yes, well, we can unwrap this because we're using the try question mark. Of course, we'd use a guard statement and put all that in there, but still. And yes, result of try question mark is unused. That's all fine. But that's basically the syntax that you need in order to be loading and saving data. In the next tutorial, I will show you how to link this, that is the data source, to the collection view and display the information and save it contained therein. And that's it for subclassing NSManagedObject. I hope now you can see how accessing the data through classes and dot notation are going to make life so much easier for you. All of that type checking is done by Swift, and that's going to come in ultra handy. If you have any questions about the tutorial, then please leave a comment below or hit me up on Twitter @SwiftAlmanac. Please subscribe to the channel, it's free, and check out our website at www.swiftalmanac.com. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Cheers.